During this time in the 1920s, so many things are happening for Bach that it's almost difficult to know which way to jump first. It would be relevant, and I think we should say something about his personal life and what's happening there. Well, what to say? How much of a personal life do we want to reveal? What is actually going on inside Bach's own life that is relevant to the process of discovery that he's making, which is important for us now? Well, I think some facts are relevant. The fact that he was married twice, that he remarried within a matter of weeks of the death of his first wife, that was actually the same time as he was found to have cancer, and that this spurred him into a kind of a personal mission, if you like, where he was dedicating his life to solving problems of disease, and, as I say, particularly chronic disease. So during the 1920s, we find him researching chronic disease, and by the time of 1925, he's published with C.E. Wheeler, who's a medical colleague, a book called Chronic Disease, a Working Hypothesis. Now, the main proposition in this book is that diet is the strongest influence upon health, and most particularly the argument that a raw food diet is going to have the strongest impact on the health of the person. If we go back for a moment, remember that what goes in here is actually what's going to influence the health of the individual. And in case you think I'm making this up, let me assure you that everything I say comes from Bach. These are not my words. This is a paper read at the International Homeopathic Congress in 1927 called The Problem of Chronic Disease. And he says the alimentary canal must of necessity be of the utmost importance. Its superficial area is greater than that of the skin surface of our bodies. Moreover, it has the power of absorbing from that in which it is bathed, a property not possessed by our external, well, it's a bit wordy, but what he's saying is this membrane absorbs, this one doesn't, or does, but only to a very partial extent. It says the content of the tract, the gastrointestinal tract, is the fluid in which we live, from which we obtain our fluid and our food. It is to us similar to the water in which a unicellular amoeba moves. In other words, what goes on in here, this is the ocean in which we swim and in which we exist, and everything that we take into ourselves, or at least the large portion of what we take into ourselves, comes from the gastrointestinal tract. Therefore, his argument is, what we put in is of the utmost influence and impact upon the health of the whole metabolism. And this is the thesis that he's written about already in Chronic Disease, and he says over and over and over again, a raw food diet is the most important thing that you can have in order to engender health, or an improvement in health in the individual, particularly when it's linked to chronic disease. Now, this in 1925, and yet still we are doing research, we're commenting on, we're trying to understand the link between diet and cancer. The World Health Cancer Research Organization, it's making this proposal that you should have 5 a day in terms of diet. I mean, it's a subject that is still being looked at, and the causal relationship between over-prepared food, overcooked food, or the kind of what do they call it, junk food that we eat, which is the most part of our diet, and it's not ever admitted. Even yesterday a report was made which said there is no link between heart disease and what we eat, or if there is, it's a very slight one, and we don't really need to worry about it. Anyway, that's another subject, but obviously one that Bach was passionate about and which involved him very deeply and very strongly. Now, surely, if he had cancer, it must have been connected in his mind. How he eats may have a relationship to his prognosis and the outcome of... He had surgery, but the fact that he then survived for another 19 years, right, he's in remission rather than he's actually got well, because he ends up dying from cancer. But this is the focus of his research and his investigation. Now, where do we go next? What Bach says later on is he doesn't believe in the germ theory. What's the germ theory? The germ theory states that there are microbes that are invasive elements which are designed and intent upon coming into you and causing you ill health. Now, for certain, food poisoning, I mentioned salmonella and E. coli and these things, they are such an invasive agent. But the idea that there are germs from influenza or for whatever it is that are just waiting to invade the body, and that what the body needs to do is to have some counter-attack to oppose it, he says this is not really what it's about, because these germs are omnipresent, they're around us all the time. What we depend upon is the overall health of the immune system, and that is what's going to be influenced by what you take into your body. So far, so good. But what we take into our body is not just food. The I Ching, the Chinese Book of Wisdom, says, pay heed to what a man, this is hexagram 27, pay heed to what a man seeks to fill his mouth with. And certainly food is what goes into the mouth, and words are what come out of the mouth. But what informs the words and what determines the food? It's actually much more to do with the mind, whatever we mean by that. So, as well as the physical content of our life, there's also the influence of the emotional state and the mental state. There's other things which determine the health and the well-being of the immune system. Now, in a sense, this is taking the story a little bit further along than Bach would have been with it in the mid-1920s, but it's what is developing in his thinking. Because, as we said before, he's already recognized that these 7 nosode types behave in a particular way. And it's a very short step between observing a way of behaving and seeing that that behaviour is both the cause and the symptom of what is the whole process of health for the individual. That sounds very, very wordy, but it's the fulcrum on which everything turns in terms of Bach's research and what will become his discovery of the Bach flower remedies. So I think what we can say is that as well as physical things entering the system, we have, let's give them a different colour, we have the influence that is brought about from the emotional and mental state of the person. And interestingly, actually, the reverse is also true, because the physical condition of the individual affects and influences their emotional state. In iris diagnosis, for instance, the stomach is very close to the mind. So how you feel, we speak about, what is it, a gut instinct. In my guts I feel. So there we are. What we feel, now this is language, but language is a pointer to what actually is reality. And Bach began to study this and think about it. So I would say there is also another thing, which is the return message. Now, Nora Weeks, who wrote this book about medical discoveries, makes a lot of the story that in 1928 Bach was at a dinner. He was a Mason and he was at a Masonic gathering, and while he was there he was studying the people with whom he was dining, and suddenly it was borne in upon him that although people were not related, they behaved in such a similar way that you might think they were from the same family. Let me show you what I mean. I mean, this really should be white, shouldn't it, if I'm a waiter coming round and I come to your table and say, well, Dr. Bach, what would you like for dinner? And, or maybe he's ordered and he puts the food in front of him and he starts to eat. And his neighbour, when the waiter comes, says, oh, I don't know. What would you recommend? And on the other side, the man says to the waiter, oh, I'll have 6 of those and 3 of those. Or you should have that and not that. In other words, the way that the different people respond to the person who is bringing the food round, or the way that they actually eat their food, is very different and very varied. And you can see in this the gesture of the individual. I mean, some people, they're sitting at the table and with their knives and forks, and they're so busy talking that they forget to feed. Other ones sit there and they toy with their food but are not really interested in it. Other ones say, eat it very, very fast. Other ones look at it as if it's going to hurt them. I don't know whether I want it or not. And he sees this as, again, rather like the 7 types, he sees this as being the gesture of the individual. And different people on different parts of the table behave in a way that's very similar. Now, Nora Weeks, she tells the story. He rushed home and started to write out these behavioural types, and this was the basis of his delineation of the 12 healers, the 12 type remedies. Well, if we look towards that, move away from the 7 no-sense, and we start to think of 12 types. Types of what? Types of people, types of individual, types of, maybe they're like archetypes. Because Jung would have been writing and working at around this time, and maybe Bach has kind of caught up with some of his ideas. Who knows? In the 1920s is a very, very fertile period for the study of human nature and the discovering that sort of psychology is in its infancy. And Bach actually speaks of these as soul types. Now, not everybody is happy with this word soul, and I'm not even sure what really it means to have a soul type. But he speaks of them as being distinct groups of individuals who have the same way of behaving. And in fact, his theory is that we all are one of these types. So as we come on, just as you have, let's say in astrology, I'm a Sagittarian, you're a Pisces, And everybody knows what that means. I'm not a Sagittarian, and I know you're not a Pisces, but or I'm a Taurian and you're a Gemini, and therefore we expect somebody to behave in a certain way. And it's quite interesting, Bach was himself actually conversant with astrology and was interested in astrology. So when we look back, and it's quite significant to think, what were his dates? Dr. Bach was born on the 24th of September 1886. So he was, in fact, just on the cusp of Virgo and Libra. I mean, we don't know what time he was born, so this is like a representative chart, astrological chart. He's, Sun is maybe 1 degree Libra, Moon in Taurus. How wonderful. No, not Moon in Taurus. Moon in Leo. Moon in Leo. Now, if you're an astrologer, that immediately means you can start to plan out, what kind of a person he was. And he would have had some sense for this, because at a later date he discusses these soul types, these in terms of the moon sign in astrology. Now, it's often said, Dr. Bach was interested in astrology, so therefore we could dismiss him as nonsense, or he was interested in astrology and you should use astrology to diagnose and prescribe the Bach flower remedies. But he actually stepped right away from this. I'm only using this as an illustration of what kind of a sense he had for these type remedies. And what I think is most significant and most relevant in this situation is that he said everybody is one of these, and that we are born with this as part of our essential nature, and that it is really a life lesson that we have to learn. We'll come on to this in a moment when we look at Heal Thyself and his theory of disease and health. But if everybody is one of these 12 types, it must surely have occurred to Dr. Bach that he himself was one as well. So just as his earlier work and research is involved in the study of his own process of health and disease as a result of his cancer, now as he begins to see the influence of the psychological state of the person bearing down upon the health of the physical body, but also the whole of the whole being of the person, now he sees, well, the type of person that I am is going to have an influence upon how my body works and what kind of health I can expect. I know I'm jumping back with these pages a bit. I want to clip them together. But this is the influence of the mind upon the metabolism and on the whole physical body. Let's go back to him at his dinner party in 1928 when he's with all his Masonic colleagues. The way that I eat impacts upon the whole metabolic process and the process of digestion. If I eat very, very fast, I won't have chewed my food properly enough. The dialin and whatever else, the enzymes that are in the mouth, won't have helped the digestion. And by eating fast, most likely it will go through my system very quickly. And this is part of the kind of gesture that's within my body. Now, it's not difficult to see that probably I'm a fairly fast person metabolically. If you don't know how fast your metabolism is, you can easily test it. Eat some beetroot and wait and see when your fecal swab turns red. It sounds crude, but it gives you a very clear guide. Now, if your system takes 2 or 3 days to get that through, you've got a slow system. And conversely, some people, let's say, if your circulation is very slow, you know how your hands go cold. I mean, my circulation is pretty strong, my hands are full of blood. But some people, the peripheral circulation is very weak, and that is linked with, not necessarily linked with, but is likely to be linked with a kind of reduction in the life force within the person. And that is a statement of their overall soul condition. So, if we go back to Bach, and I think this is where he actually makes a revolution in medicine, because what he does when he wants to discover these soul types is to think, I'm one of them, and if I'm going to find something that will help me to change my mind, to improve my emotional, mental balance, I have to find a remedy for me. It's not, I'm going to find a remedy for you. Because all research otherwise is to say, I think you should have this. I think this is the treatment to cure your disease. And it's always external. Whereas Bach starts really from the inside of the process with self-discovery. And this becomes very, very important in order to see how the Bach flower remedies work and where they come from and what is the opportunity for change, development, learning, growth and so on that comes through this. Why is this important? Because Bach says disease and illness is a lesson from the soul, a whispered message to help us to understand the need for change. As I said, a lot of ideas are going in at the same time here, so the best way to describe this is to look at an individual. And since I'm here, look at me. But if I'm going to act in a certain way, I'm actually going to start with the first of the 12, which Bach said was impatience. Which, as I said, was him looking for his own first remedy. Not much is known really about Bach in terms of his temperament, his nature, his attitude towards life, but we can say for sure that he was a man who was very cardinal in his thinking, very determined upon a course of action, that he wanted to discover something, and to that extent he's led by his head. It's his mental approach to life that is the guiding rudder to the process. We know from his, from Nora Weeks' biography of people who knew him, that he was somebody who worked alone. He preferred to do his own work because other people dragged him down, they were too slow, they couldn't catch up with his ideas. If he couldn't get it across to them or they couldn't understand it, he would just walk away. No patience for developing a relationship which wasn't actually going the way that he wanted to go. Well, that's quite interesting when you think that he had two marriages and neither of them lasted. His second wife used to come down with his daughter, incidentally, to the hospital and say, why don't you come home? And he'd say, for goodness sake, leave me alone. I've got work to get on with. Now, I know this because I've met his daughter. This man is not a saint. He's not all that he's made out to be. In some senses, I feel uncomfortable talking about Bach in this way because it sounds as if it was disrespectful. But it's absolutely integral to the process of his discovery that he went through a process of understanding himself and a process of self-discovery. Because without that, nothing makes sense. So, one of the things that is said about Bach is that he was an irritable person, that he could lose his temper. I believe it was a straw fire. It went up very fast and it collapsed very quickly. So energetically his system is one that is definitely fast metabolically, but also fast mentally. And what does this actually mean? Let's say I have the idea, I want to come and see you, and before I've half had the idea, I'm out of my chair and jumping in that way. Let's say, do you know the exercise you say to somebody, relax? Have you ever done this? You say, relax. I'm holding my own arm up, and really relax. Okay, and you take your hand away. You're not relaxed, because if you were relaxed. So in this type of a person, there's a great deal of muscular tension. And you see it in these muscles here. And of course, often there's pain. There could be headaches, and there could be, this tension could be bearing down on the musculature of the body, because they never actually really relax themselves. So they're constantly alert and on the edge of action. Now, what Bach says about such a person is that their soul lesson, what they have to discover and understand about life, is that there's a relationship between pain and peace and ease and tranquility and gentleness and forgiveness. That he actually is quite specific when he starts writing about this type, that these are people who have caused pain to others in a previous life. Now we're really stepping into mystical realms, but this is what he says. And they've come into this life with the soul lesson and the need to learn gentleness. Because whilst there's a certain amount of brilliance in this determination to move forward, there's also a need to be receptive. And so the gesture is a combination of these things. Now, is there a pattern of disease that might go with the gesture of such a person? And it's not hard to see. I mentioned headaches, but also, this is going to be something, a function of the heart, because high blood pressure and hypertension and these sort of things are likely to go with such a temperament. And so Bach's idea is that if you have problems in your physical body, see what they are telling you about the need to change your life. And just so that we look to see 2 or 3 down the line, because he theoretically worked out these types after the dinner party. There's also Memulus, which, let's give this one fear, this one let's call it tension. I mean, he attributes particular archetypal names and let's say classifications to these remedies, but we shouldn't get caught up in words, because it's the idea and the feeling of the thing that's more important. The Memulus type was definitely one who, whereas the Empathians person is very alert to move, the Memulus person is almost the opposite. They're down, that kind of thing. You know about the 5-part breath? 5-part breath? Well, the Memulus person only breathes through the top little bit, yeah. Because they're closing down, they're protecting themselves from the world. You could say, what is the soul lesson for somebody who's afraid? And for a fear type of person. And it is, well, Bach says actually it's sympathy. It's to have a love and care and understanding of other people's difficulties. You could also say that it's a need to learn to trust life. So if you start to look at the imagery of that and the idea that's behind it, you could say that at the physical level, if somebody is always like this, always afraid, you can see how it constricts the organs of the body, it constricts the movement, the circulation, and things will be the result of that. There will be physical responses and results of that. But in terms of the mind, if everything you see that comes towards you in life is perceived as a threat and something to be afraid of, you never step out into the space of your own opportunity and life. So it's this. The first one, impatience, is opening up. The second one is constricting. The third one, which these names are, these are the plants that he later found. So I'm using already his description, and the archetype for Clematis is the dreamer. So here you have actually in these first three the outgoing, the interned, and the escape, the element of air. And indeed you have three different elements because you have fire, water and air. So there's quite a kind of complex structure of ideas that he's putting into this. And we should not forget that Bach is not just, we should not forget that Bach actually is a student of inner teaching during this time. I don't know how, we don't know where he got into it, we don't know what school he went to or anything to do with it. And if you read his essays and what he wrote, it's difficult to find a particular address where you can say this is where he learned it. But what I'm suggesting here is that these relate to a much deeper, wider tradition. Perhaps they're part of the great tradition of understanding how human beings work and how the mental and emotional state, and indeed the spiritual state of the individual, relates to the health of the physical body. So that actually we're working through levels of energy as it comes into the physical level of expression in our body. And for Bach, it's absolutely no point in discussing ill health in the physical body without seeing these other levels and the influence of these other levels and the impact that they have upon the purpose and well-being of an individual soul, as he describes it. Now, the point about these, I mean, these are three of the 12, but he's actually been observing this all along, because when he was working in hospital in, say, 1916, 1917, he's already getting the idea that the prognosis for people who are ill, that's to say, what will be the medical outcome, does not just depend upon the disease and the treatment that they're getting, but upon the mental attitude of the patient themselves as an individual. So that, you know, hospital wards are still organised, you know, it's the ENT, the ear, nose and throat, or the gynecological ward, or, you know, you go there if you've got a problem with your heart and another place if you've got a problem with your hand. Well, so there were wards in Bach's time of people who have basically got the same disease. And they're getting the same kind of treatment, but the outcome for the individual patient will vary depending upon their attitude, their emotional state, and their attitude towards their illness. So if somebody is very afraid, the likelihood is that they will be going to get worse rather than better, because of the fear. This is what he observed, that the fear that the person had about their disease was likely to impact upon the prognosis. Somebody who was, let's say in this case, very dreamy, not really in the world, actually possibly even welcoming death, as he will describe Clematis in a couple of years to come. He will describe Clematis as those who seek death, who actually It's as if the lost one, a loved person, is trying to pull them over to the other side. So that when they are ill and in hospital and they've got some chronic disease, they welcome death. So the same treatment is less likely to have a benefit if the mental attitude of the individual is saying, I can see myself drifting away, and with the angels, I'm already out of it. Conversely, somebody who is impatient, who doesn't like being in bed, particularly doesn't like being in bed with a lot of other people in the ward, is going to think, I know the way to get out from this problem. It's to get better. And so they will be the ones who will be up and getting out from the ward, getting active, getting movement, getting going, getting free from illness. Now, it's not an invariable rule that the impatient person or the impatient type is going to get better sooner, but it does give you an indication that this is the sort of observation which Bach was making right early on in his medical career.